The doubt is very interesting, I think, because particularly our presumptions about doubt. As you said, you collapse, and that part of it was right. Then you say into doubt, and you doubt the whole process. We tend to think that doubt is doubt of something, because when we get into doubt, it's always associated with something that seems doubtful. So we tend to associate getting into doubt, having doubt, we tend to associate doubt itself with something that we doubt, something itself that we were wondering about now, feeling negative about. Whereas actually doubt is a mechanism that doesn't have anything to do with any object or thing to be doubted. Doubt is just another form or sign of the self-contraction. It is the self-contraction itself. What we call doubt is a rather mental and emotional a way of noticing the self-contraction. And it's just that, self-contraction. It's not doubt of something, it's just self-contraction. The sensation of the self-contraction is doubt. But we think we're doubting something because whenever that collapse occurs, something that we otherwise feel positive about when we're not contracted suddenly becomes something that we can't tolerate and don't feel happy about. And that's where doubt begins to bind you. Because then you start trying to figure out some way to feel good about that thing. Whereas that's not your proper business when you're collapsed into doubt. You must understand yourself sufficiently to realize that doubt is not about a something. You didn't start going into doubt because suddenly the thing you now doubt was coming into doubt. You started to collapse into this doubt simply as a phase, a kind of even a biological phase, what is really a psychophysical phasing of self-contraction. All kinds of influences cause it to do this, including the mechanism itself is adapted to cycles of collapse and reopening, like the moon phasing. There's this constant cycle of self-contraction occurring, and when it occurs, we read it mentally, emotionally, physically, read it in terms of our energy. And then we also read it in terms of our relations, all kinds of relations or objects, mental objects, thought systems that we believe in, suddenly we become dissociated from. You see. Things with which we are related emotionally suddenly become things we can't connect with. These include relationships, or things that we may enjoy at other times. You see. Our physical well-being, physical equanimity is lost when this self-contraction occurs, you see. Instead of talking about doubt, you could just as well talk about emotional upset or physical disturbance or pain, because these are all also signs of exactly the same mechanism, just the self-contraction itself, egoity itself. Whatever you look at when the self-contraction has occurred is something from which you are dissociated now. Self-contraction dissociates you, inevitably. So when self-contracted, no matter what you look at, it is something you are now separated from, dissociated from. So if you look at a mental object, or a thought process, or a system of thinking about things, it is now something for which you have no sympathy. It is now something for which you do not have a thought that you can connect yourself to it with. You are divorced from it, dissociated from it. And so you feel now, because you're self-contracted, this whole system of thinking about things that seemed, when you were previously not contracted, to be whole and true and inviting and worth involving your life in, is now something that you can't connect with at all. And so you say, it is doubtful. You start finding all kinds of reasons why that whole way of life may not be worth getting involved in at all, may be nonsense. You start entertaining all such thoughts. And then because you are not quite willing to give all that up so freely, you start spending your doubting time trying to find some reason to believe in all of that thought process again. Whereas what should you really be doing? You should be able to identify this symptom of doubt. Just as you identify sinus congestion as a cold, you should be able to identify doubt as self-contraction, and not identify it with some object that is now doubtful to you because you're contracted, you see. Self-contraction can take the form of, always takes the form of emotional dissociation also. Well, if you're feeling emotionally dissociated because of self-contraction, then all of the relations that you are emotionally connected to otherwise now are something from which you are dissociated. So every time you fall into this state of self-contraction, you would, if you, just as you might doubt all things related to the mind that you might otherwise believe, likewise all things with which you're related emotionally now become unpalatable, unusable, unlikable. So every time you fall into self-contraction, you would tend to get divorced from your spouse if you're married, you'd quit your job, you'd send your children away and never see them again, you'd send all your friends a letter, or this is not reasonable, obviously. I mean, if one day you are in love with someone, the next day because you're contracted, you can't even connect with them emotionally. Is that believable? It must clearly suggest there's something wrong with you. You're ill somehow. In some sense you must be ill, you see. That's really what it's about. And if you could just be relieved of this emotional disease that you're suffering at the moment, it'll be obvious to you because you know that you love that person, that something's just overcoming you. If only you could just get rid of this disease then, this upset, then you'd be naturally connected with that person and would have that relationship which you otherwise enjoy with them. Well, so with anything you may think about that falls into doubt. Once you notice that you're doubting something that you have otherwise thoroughly reviewed and know the truth of it, you see, and all of a sudden you find yourself doubting it absolutely, instead of trying to struggle through all kinds of thought processes to reconnect with it, you ought to just identify the disease. Realize that you're just ill, temporarily insane. Self-contracted, dissociated, that's all it is. You don't have to trouble yourself in mind at all to try and reconnect with that. Stop getting into the thought business at that moment and start paying attention to observing yourself and finding your way out of this contracted state, this disease, you see. That's your business. But people don't make it their business unless they understand themselves, you see. People are always tending to get into the wrong business because they don't understand this chronic disease, this rolling disease of self-contraction. It is chronic, it is more or less constant in most people, and it is constantly taking on different forms, different signs. You read it mentally, emotionally, physically, in terms of your energies, you read it socially, you read it in terms of relations of all kinds. You're constantly seeing the signs of this self-contraction, but you are identifying it with something wrong with this object, or that relationship, or this thought, you see. And that's not what it's about. Only self-knowledge will help you to get down to the right business of life in any moment. And if you don't have self-knowledge, then you'll always make an error and always be up to the wrong thing. So when you feel doubt, instead of noticing it as disease and feeling yourself beyond self-contraction, instead you'll be reading all kinds of things and trying to think your way back into your previous system of belief or motivation, you see. Whereas when you get into doubt in that sense, relative to something that you've already thoroughly inspected, you should just take a little vacation from thought stress for a while and deal with the self-contraction as a totality. And how do you do that? Well, that's what I've been instructing people about for years, you see. It's a matter of self-generating spiritual sadhana, spiritual practice. It's a matter of making use of, first of all, self-observation, but then making use of the practice of spiritual resort and meditation, spiritual exercise. Well, this is what you should do instead of trying to think your way out of doubt or feel your way out of emotional distress, see, or fast your way out of a cramp, or eat your way out of a cramp that is really originating egoically. You've got to, in other words, through self-observation, you've got to come to the point where you can identify your own dilemma and not, therefore, get sidetracked into all kinds of efforts that are nonsensical, that don't deal with what is really wrong with you see? So doubt is not about anything, in other words. It only seems to be about something. And because you're constantly tending to get self-contracted, if you're a more or less solid type, you will always be tending to register self-contraction in terms of doubt. And therefore you will always be stressfully trying to think yourself into a better system of thinking, that you will never doubt again. But you will always doubt any system of thinking, as long as you are tending towards self-contraction. Inevitably, the self-contraction leads to doubt. What you must realize is self-knowledge about that, and to not be led into struggling mentally when the sensation of doubt comes on. You must be able to relax that effort. Know that doubt is not about anything, but only seems to be about something, and is really just the self-contraction showing itself. The more you can observe and understand that thoroughly, the freer you will become of this tendency and the things that you tend to do about it that merely add to your stress, you see, and bewilder you further. And what will that self-knowledge lead you to? Inevitably, the spiritual process more and more profoundly. Instead of busying yourself with mental efforts to achieve an undoubtable thought system, you see, you'll be spending your time in meditation. Instead of reading endlessly, book to book, system to system, you'll give the mind appropriate time for study, true, but you won't be exhausting yourself in nonsensical mental efforts. And you'll be using a lot of your thinking and reading time in the meditation hall, releasing this disease, which ultimately doesn't even exist, once you understand its principle and allow it to be mastered by reality.